Roberts.
President. As a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia, I will speak about medical cannabis and what is needed to give more than 1 million Australians access to this powerful medicine. Mr Acting Deputy President, on Monday, this place was visited by a delegation of concerned citizens asking for major changes to Minister Hunt's regime, his regime of suppressing medical cannabis. Now I ask the people, are these people radicals intent on subverting Minister Hunt's pharmaceutical game, or are these everyday Australians making a perfectly fair request? I'll let the people decide. Mr Acting Deputy President, let me name some of the groups in attendance yesterday. The New South Wales Nurses and Midwives Association, Chronic Pain Australia, Epilepsy Action Australia, Cancer Voices, United in Compassion, and, Mr Acting Deputy President, the Country Women's Association of Australia. Yes, the Country Women's Association were here yesterday pleading for improved access to medical cannabis. Mr Hunt needs to worry when he gets on the wrong side of the good ladies of the CWA. Now, Minister Hunt will tell you that the number of approvals is rising. More people are getting medical cannabis, he says. That is not quite right. Every time a prescription is renewed for an existing patient or a brand of medication changed for an existing patient, Minister Hunt adds 1 to his count. Even if the patient cannot afford their script, which can be as high as $2,000 a month, they are still counted, even when the scripts are not used. 6,667 current approvals is probably no more than 2,000 or 3,000 people actually accessing medical cannabis legally, and it may be even less. I have a problem with that level of dishonesty. I have a problem with how we treated Lee Donnellan, an Army veteran from Townsville in Queensland. Lee served a tour of active duty in Afghanistan and returned with PTSD. It took 18 months of jumping through health department hoops to get approval for medical cannabis, only to find the prescription for 2 different types of cannabis would have cost $2,000 a month. Veterans Affairs refused to pay, and Lee could not afford that sort of money. Mr Hunt's department locks people out of medical cannabis. So Lee Donnellan started growing his own, and medical cannabis worked. Medical cannabis allowed Lee to slowly drop the 7 different medications his doctor prescribed and replace them with just 1, medical cannabis. His health improved dramatically. Unfortunately, the Queensland Police didn't share his vision for better health and arrested him. At that point, Veterans Affairs relented and started funding his prescription. A happy ending, you would think, Mr Acting Deputy President. But no, Queensland Police have refused to drop his case. The department locks people out of medical cannabis. And here is where it gets interesting. If Lee is sent to jail because he has a legal prescription that Veterans Affairs is paying for, he will be supplied with medical cannabis to use in jail, the very thing he is being sent to jail for doing. Monty Python couldn't make this stuff up. The hurdles placed in front of Lee Donnellan are typical of the hurdles facing everyday Australians needing to access medical cannabis. To be successful, the patient must have a condition for which cannabis is approved. This list includes juvenile epilepsy, cancer side effects like nausea, some types of pain and palliative care. Short list, Mr Acting Deputy President? Or secondly, find a doctor that the government approves to make cannabis applications, and that may involve travelling hundreds of kilometres. Or 3, submit your full medical history with proof that you have tried all available medications. The department locks people out of medical cannabis. Then there's a 4th hurdle, pricing. Under Minister Hunt, pricing is being used as a barrier to adoption. Now, I understand the need for security and accountability, of course. However, those very expensive legal requirements are being apportioned against just very small volumes, and that means each prescription has a very high cost, of which the actual plant is a tiny, tiny part of the cost. The department locks people out of medical cannabis. As long as prices remain as high as $2,000 a month, so few Australians will be able to access medical cannabis that the volumes needed for cheap prices will never happen. Minister Hunt has authored a perfect example of catch-22. Minister Hunt's department locks people out of medical cannabis. Now, Barry Lambert from the Lambert Initiative for Cannabinoid Therapeutics and Sydney University have this to say about Minister Hunt's system. Quote, "The Act and regulations are responsible for these ongoing delays. This dysfunction is harming vulnerable Australians. Without a large-scale domestic industry, expensive imported products will continue to drive thousands of desperate patients into the black market, and research will continue to be hampered by a lack of suitable preclinical and clinical material." While the government has issued 27 grower licences so far, according to United in Compassion Group, only one has been approved to sell their product into the cannabis approval pathway. The rest are relying on the emerging export market to stay in business. Those businesses, Mr Acting Deputy President, will need to stay in the export market until the government faces up to its own failure. This is a failure that results from Minister Hunt trying to shoehorn medical cannabis into the world that he and his department understands and creates, a world of pharmaceuticals where every new product is patent protected, enabling huge sums of money to run clinical trials, fill in forms and pass through layers of committees and reports before finally getting approval. The multi-million-dollar cost of that process is then built into the price paid by taxpayers forevermore. Mr Acting Deputy President, if that process produced a safe result for patients, then one could support that. However, this year, 1,000 Australians will die from opioid overdoses of legally prescribed pharmaceuticals. These are legal opioids that went through this same approval pathway. The slow, expensive, bureaucrat-laden process is no guarantee of a positive outcome for patients. It could even mean death. Natural medical cannabis cannot be patented. No company will ever spend the millions necessary to navigate this process, because they will never own the rights to the cannabis plant that is proven so effective and so safe. The department locks people out of medical cannabis. Yet the need to put cannabis through this process is the reason being advanced for not listing medical cannabis on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, which allows scripts to be filled on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme at low cost to the patient. The department locks people out of medical cannabis. According to Roy Morgan, as many as 1 million Australians would try medical cannabis as an alternative to their existing medication. Minister Hunt has managed to get cannabis into the hands of a measly few thousand, and his department succeeded in locking millions of people out of medical cannabis. In the meantime, many patients are suffering. One Nation calls on the government to respect the sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship and allow doctors to make the best decisions for their patients, free from federal government interference and the department's locks. The pathway system must be amended to allow a single post-prescription notification from any doctor who chooses to prescribe medical cannabis, together with a doctor's assessment of the results achieved should the patient return for a repeat. One Nation, Mr Acting Deputy President, is persistent. One Nation has tried 4 strategies to remove the department's locks that are clearly not there because of a problem with medical cannabis. These are bureaucratic locks, not safety locks. One Nation has had to try new strategies because medical cannabis is so safe and effective. The department is locking out competition to protect Big Pharma's synthetic drugs. One Nation, Mr Acting Deputy President, calls for the list of approved conditions to be removed and use allowed at the discretion of doctors who are best placed to make those decisions. The TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, must then fast-track the approval of medical cannabis preparations from amongst the Australian growers currently licensed for that purpose. Then we can have a conversation about the best model for medical cannabis. Then the people can have access to this wonderful medicine, natural, safe medicine. One Nation will continue to listen to the people, continue to depend on the science and advocate for the science, and continue to speak for the people until the people's needs are fulfilled and lives restored and enhanced. Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President.